The Galactic Sorcery Academy perched on asteroid Hexion 7 like a particularly pretentious tick on the universe's backside, sucking the life force from anyone unfortunate enough to be deemed magically gifted, which, considering the admission standards, apparently included anyone who could light a candle without setting their eyebrows ablaze, a surprisingly rare skill among teenagers across 17 star systems. The Academy's founders, in their infinite wisdom and questionable sanity, had designed the institution around a delightfully medieval concept: might makes right, but with more glitter and fewer peasants dying of plague. The student body was stratified into rigid castes based on their magical potency, measured by something called the Ethereal Resonance Index, or ERI. Because nothing said advanced galactic civilization like reducing sentient beings to numbers on a cosmic report card. At the apex of this enlightened hierarchy sat the Dominion class, students whose ERI readings could power small moons and whose egos could eclipse binary star systems. These blessed children of various alien aristocracies strutted through the Academy's crystalline corridors like they owned not just the place, but the very concept of ownership itself. Their magical abilities manifested in spectacular displays, transmuting base metals into precious gems during lunch breaks, conjuring miniature galaxies for their entertainment, or casually rearranging the local space-time continuum to avoid being late for class. Below them scurried the Apex class, students whose magical prowess was merely exceptional rather than world-ending. They served as enforcers and brown-nosers to the Dominion class, desperately hoping their servility might earn them scraps of respect. These poor souls could manipulate matter on a molecular level, bend light to their will, or commune with cosmic entities, but apparently, that wasn't quite enough to earn a seat at the cool kids' table in this particular corner of the galaxy. The middle tier consisted of the standard class, students with adequate magical abilities who kept their heads down and their mouths shut. They possessed enough power to be useful but not enough to be threatening, making them perfect cannon fodder for the Academy's various hazing rituals and character-building exercises. Their magic was competent but unremarkable, healing minor wounds, levitating objects lighter than a Venusian fruit basket, or communicating telepathically within a range measured in mere kilometers rather than light years. And then, at the very bottom of this cosmic food chain, wallowed the Foundation class. These unfortunate souls had barely enough magical aptitude to qualify for admission, their ERI readings hovering just above what the Academy generously termed cosmic background radiation level. They were the universe's participation trophy recipients, kept around primarily to make everyone else feel better about their own abilities and to perform menial tasks that even the Academy's sentient cleaning drones found beneath their dignity. Into this nurturing environment stumbled a seemingly unremarkable human girl, whose ERI reading had barely registered on the Academy's sensors. The testing crystals had flickered so weakly during her evaluation that 3 different technicians had checked their equipment for malfunction. Her magical signature was so faint that it registered somewhere between statistical noise and probably imagining things, earning her immediate placement in the Foundation class alongside the other cosmic disappointment. She possessed the kind of forgettable appearance that made surveillance cameras question their own existence. Average height, nondescript brown hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and eyes that held all the apparent depth of a puddle on a particularly shallow planet. Her uniform hung on her frame like it was apologizing for existing, and she moved through the Academy with the kind of quiet efficiency that made professors forget her name between roll call and dismissal. The Academy's social ecosystem treated Foundation class students with all the warmth typically reserved for particularly persistent space parasites. They were subjected to daily humiliations that ranged from creatively degrading to probably violating several galactic accords on sentient rights. The upper-class students seemed to view tormenting the Foundation class as both a recreational activity and a sacred duty, while the faculty maintained their professional detachment by pretending not to notice when students were used as target practice for advanced combat technique. Our protagonist absorbed these indignities with the kind of stoic silence that either indicated profound wisdom or a concerning disconnection from reality. She attended every class, completed every assignment, and endured every humiliation without so much as a raised eyebrow or a whispered complaint. Her professors noted her perfect attendance record, with the same enthusiasm they might reserve for cataloging particularly uninteresting varieties of space fungus. During the daily ritual known as practical applications, where students demonstrated their magical abilities for evaluation and public mockery, she would step forward when called, and produced the kind of lackluster display that made dying stars seem vibrant by comparison. A faint shimmer in the air, a barely perceptible shift in temperature, or perhaps a small pebble that might have moved on its own if you squinted really hard and believed in the power of wishful thinking. The Dominion-class students found her performances particularly amusing, treating them as intermission entertainment between their own spectacular displays of cosmic power. They would offer helpful suggestions like, "Have you tried actually having magic? Or perhaps you should consider a career in something more suited to your talents, like professional air breathing." But while her classmates were busy either cowering in fear or preening like interdimensional peacocks, she was doing something far more dangerous than anyone realized. She was listening, and watching, and learning. Every spell cast in her presence, every magical theory discussed in hushed whispers, every secret technique demonstrated by show-off upperclassmen, all of it was being catalogued and analyzed by a mind that had decided patience was not just a virtue, but a weapon. The Academy's rigid hierarchy assumed that magical power was fixed, measurable, and immutable. Students were sorted into their castes like cosmic inventory, their worth determined by the strength of their initial magical signature. The system was designed to maintain order, preserve the status quo, and ensure that those born to power would never be challenged by those born without it. It was, by any reasonable measure, a perfect system, which probably should have been the first warning sign that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. The Academy operated on a 12-month cycle that the administration cheerfully called an academic year, but which bore a striking resemblance to what less euphemistic civilizations might term ritualized, psychological torture, with a meal plan. Each day brought fresh opportunities for the upper castes to demonstrate their superiority through increasingly creative forms of harassment, while the Foundation class students developed the kind of survival instincts typically associated with prey animals on particularly hostile planets. Our protagonist had adopted a strategy that would have impressed military tacticians across the galaxy, if any of them had bothered to notice a seemingly powerless girl shuffling through her daily routine. She had positioned herself as the perfect observer, invisible enough to avoid attention, present enough to witness everything, and harmless enough that even paranoid Dominion-class students forgot she existed the moment she left their field of vision. The first month had been educational in the way that natural disasters teach you about emergency preparedness. She watched Professor Nexus, a Centaurian with delusions of pedagogical grandeur, demonstrate advanced transmutation by turning a Foundation-class student's lunch into what he called a learning experience about molecular instability, which was academic speak for toxic sludge that violated several health codes. The professor's technique was flawless, his execution precise, and his complete disregard for student welfare absolutely breathtaking in its casual cruelty. She memorized every gesture, every incantation, every subtle manipulation of ethereal energy. While her classmates focused on the humiliation or the hunger, she cataloged the spell structure, analyzed the energy flow patterns, and filed away the theoretical framework that made such casual transformation possible. It was, she realized, a remarkably inefficient application of power, like using a star destroyer to crack nuts, but with less style and more sadistic glee. The second month brought advanced combat applications, taught by Commander Thorne, a battle-scarred veteran, whose approach to education involved treating students like enemy combatants, who hadn't yet learned proper surrender techniques. The Dominion-class students excelled at these sessions, hurling energy blasts that could vaporize small asteroids, while their targets inevitably, Foundation-class volunteers in the most generous interpretation of the word volunteer, scrambled for cover behind barriers that offered about as much protection as strongly worded diplomatic protest. While dodging potentially lethal magical attacks, she observed the combat patterns, the energy distribution methods, the tactical applications of various spell combinations. Each near-death experience was a masterclass in applied magical theory, delivered by instructors who seemed to believe that the best way to teach was through the imminent threat of disintegration. She noted how offensive spells could be modified, how defensive barriers could be bypassed, how the Academy's combat doctrine relied heavily on overwhelming force rather than strategic thinking. By the third month she had identified every student's magical signature, cataloged their preferred spell types, and analyzed their tactical weaknesses. The Dominion-class prince, a Germedian whose ego required its own gravitational field, favored flashy energy displays that looked spectacular but drained his reserves rapidly. His favorite target was a trembling Saturnian boy, whose crime was existing in the same star system as someone who needed to feel superior. The Academy's social dynamics revealed themselves to be as predictable as orbital mechanics, and twice as devastating. The upper castes maintained their positions through a combination of inherited power and systematic intimidation. They had turned cruelty into an art form, bullying into a science, and psychological manipulation into a recreational activity that would have impressed professional torturers across the galaxy. During theoretical applications, Professor Vega introduced concepts that made her previous understanding of magic look like finger painting compared to quantum physics. The manipulation of dimensional barriers, the binding of cosmic forces, the art of reaching across space-time to draw power from sources that existed in theoretical mathematics, rather than physical reality. The professor explained these concepts to the Dominion class students, as if they were discussing weekend plans, while treating the Foundation class like they were mentally deficient houseplants who had somehow learned to take notes. She absorbed every lecture, every demonstration, every casually dropped piece of advanced theory. The professor's assumption that Foundation class students couldn't comprehend advanced concepts meant they spoke freely about techniques that would have been classified in more security-conscious institutions. She learned about power amplification methods that could multiply magical output exponentially, about energy conservation principles that the upper-class students ignored in favor of showing off, about theoretical frameworks that suggested magical ability was far more flexible than the Academy's rigid caste system assumed. The 4th through 8th months blurred together in a continuous education in both magical theory and institutional cruelty. She watched professors play favorites with the shamelessness of corrupt politicians, observed upper-class students escalate their harassment campaigns with the dedication of doctoral researchers, and witnessed the Academy's administration demonstrates their commitment to maintaining order through willful blindness that would have impressed professional ostriches. But it was during the 9th month that she began to understand the true scope of what was possible. Advanced dimensional theory introduced concepts that made her realize the Academy's entire approach to magical education was fundamentally flawed. They were teaching students to brute force their way through magical applications, when elegance and efficiency could achieve the same results with a fraction of the energy expenditure. The professor demonstrated reality manipulation techniques that the Dominion class students accepted as their natural birthright, never questioning why some beings were born with overwhelming power, while others barely registered on magical sensor. The answer, she realized, wasn't genetic destiny or cosmic favoritism. It was simply a matter of understanding how to properly access and channel the energy that permeated the universe. By the 10th month, her patience had developed its own gravitational field. She had endured daily humiliations, absorbed advanced magical theory, analyzed every aspect of the Academy's power structure, and maintained her cover as a harmless, powerless failure. The upper-class students had grown bored with tormenting someone who never reacted, never fought back, never gave them the satisfaction of visible suffering, which was perhaps their first mistake. The second mistake was assuming that silence meant acceptance. The third mistake was believing their own propaganda about fixed magical potential and immutable power hierarchy. As the 11th month arrived, she had compiled a comprehensive understanding of every student's abilities, every professor's techniques, and every weakness in the Academy's supposedly perfect system. Her classmates saw a quiet girl who had somehow survived nearly a full year without washing out or having a spectacular breakdown. What they failed to notice was that she had spent that year becoming something the Academy had never produced in its entire prestigious history. A student who truly understood magic rather than simply wielding it. The difference, she had come to realize, was going to matter more than anyone could possibly imagine.
The final straw arrived wearing the face of institutional indifference and carrying the weight of systematic cruelty that had finally found a victim too fragile to survive it. It happened during what the Academy euphemistically called peer evaluation exercises, a weekly ritual where upper-class students were encouraged to assess the magical development of their social inferiors through methods that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to medieval interrogation techniques, but with more cosmic energy and fewer actual legal protections. The victim was a first-year Plutonian boy, whose magical signature barely registered above background radiation levels.
making him a perfect target for students who needed to feel superior about something. His crime was attempting to defend another Foundation class student from what the Dominion class had termed corrective instruction, which involved using the poor girl as target practice for spells that skirted the technical definition of non-lethal while ignoring the spirit of the concept entirely. The boy's intervention had been pathetically heroic in the way that made observers simultaneously proud of his courage and terrified for his continued existence. He had stepped between the tormentors and their victim, raised his trembling hands, and managed to produce a barrier that possessed all the structural integrity of tissue paper in a hurricane. The Dominion-class students had found this display of defiance hilarious, rather than admirable. What followed was a systematic dismantling of both his magical defenses and his physical well-being that would have impressed professional sadists across 17-star systems. They started with simple humiliation, forcing him to attempt spells he couldn't possibly perform, mocking his failures, treating his obvious terror as entertainment. When that grew boring, they escalated to practical demonstrations that involved using him as a test subject for increasingly dangerous magical applications. The faculty's response to this educational opportunity was a masterclass in willful ignorance and administrative cowardice. Professor Nexus happened to be examining some particularly fascinating dust particles on the far side of the room. Commander Thorne discovered an urgent need to inspect the structural integrity of the Academy's ceiling. The other instructors suddenly developed selective blindness that would have qualified them for disability benefits in more honest civilization. Our protagonist watched from her usual position of strategic invisibility as the boy's magical reserves were systematically drained, his defenses stripped away, his spirit broken with the efficiency of an industrial process. She observed the precise techniques used to overwhelm his barriers, noted the energy distribution patterns that made his shields collapse, cataloged the psychological pressure points that reduced him from a defiant hero to a sobbing wreck. But more importantly, she watched the moment when the Academy's perfect system revealed its true nature. The boy collapsed, his magical core depleted beyond safe levels, his life force flickering like a candle in a cosmic storm. The Dominion-class students stepped back, suddenly realizing they might have pushed their entertainment too far. The faculty rushed forward with expressions of concern that fooled absolutely nobody with functional brain cells. The official report would later describe the incident as an unfortunate training accident during routine peer assessment exercises. The boy would survive, technically, though his magical abilities would never fully recover. He would be quietly transferred to a more suitable educational environment. Academy speak for being expelled in a way that wouldn't generate awkward paperwork or troublesome investigation. That night, while her classmates either celebrated their survival of another day or wept for their fallen friend, she made a decision that would have terrified the Academy's administration if they had possessed even a fraction of the intelligence they claimed to represent. She was done observing, done cataloging, done pretending to be harmless. The Academy had spent the year teaching her everything she needed to know about magic, power, and the systematic exploitation of the weak. What they hadn't realized was that they had also taught her something far more dangerous: how their entire system could be dismantled by someone who truly understood what they were dealing with. Over the following weeks, as the 12th month approached and the Academy prepared for its annual graduation ceremony, a spectacular display where the most powerful students demonstrated their abilities before representatives from across the galaxy, she began her real education. Not in classrooms or lecture halls, but in the deep meditation chambers beneath the Academy, where students went to commune with cosmic forces and push the boundaries of their ability. The Academy's founders had built these chambers to amplify magical resonance, to help students connect with the fundamental energies that powered their abilities. The chambers were equipped with crystalline matrices that could focus and enhance ethereal energy flows, dimensional anchors that allowed for safe experimentation with reality-bending techniques, and monitoring systems that ensured student safety during dangerous magical research. What the founders had not anticipated was a student who would use these facilities not to enhance existing abilities, but to fundamentally rewrite the relationship between consciousness and cosmic energy. Night after night, while her classmates slept or engaged in the kind of recreational activities that kept Academy counselors employed, she descended into the depths and began the process of unlocking what the universe had always intended magic to be. The theoretical frameworks she had absorbed during months of careful observation suddenly snapped into focus like a cosmic puzzle revealing its solution. The energy conservation principles,
the dimensional manipulation techniques, the reality alteration methodologies. They weren't separate subjects but interconnected aspects of a unified system that the Academy's rigid caste mentality had prevented anyone from recognizing. She discovered that magical ability wasn't fixed at birth, but represented the current state of an individual's understanding of their relationship with cosmic forces. The Dominion-class students weren't inherently more powerful. They simply had better access to techniques and training that allowed them to channel energy more efficiently. The Foundation-class students weren't magically deficient. They had been systematically prevented from accessing the knowledge that would unlock their potential. Most importantly, she realized that the Academy's entire power structure was built on a lie. The caste system, the hierarchy, the systematic oppression, all of it was designed to maintain artificial scarcity and preserve the advantages of those born into privilege. It was a cosmic-scale confidence trick that had convinced entire civilizations that some beings were naturally superior to others. As the graduation ceremony approached, she completed her preparations with the methodical precision of someone planning to rewrite the fundamental laws of institutional physics. She had identified the optimal moment for her demonstration, calculated the energy requirements for her planned display, and prepared contingencies for every possible response from the Academy's power structure. The ceremony would feature the galaxy's most promising magical talents displaying their abilities before an audience of admirers, potential mentors, and institutional representatives. It was designed to celebrate the Academy's success in producing the next generation of magical elite, to reinforce the existing power structures, and to inspire younger students to accept their place in the cosmic hierarchy. It was, in short, the perfect opportunity to demonstrate what happened when someone actually understood magic rather than simply inherited it. The Academy had spent a year teaching her everything she needed to know to destroy them. Now it was time for their final exam. The Grand Amphitheater of HFY 7 had been designed by architects who clearly believed that if you were going to host a magical graduation ceremony, you might as well do it with the kind of cosmic grandeur that made entire star systems feel inadequate about their interior decorating choices. The crystalline dome stretched across 3 kilometers of asteroid surface, its faceted walls designed to amplify and focus magical energies, while providing spectacular views of the surrounding nebula. It was the kind of venue that whispered "Witness greatness," while simultaneously charging admission fees that could fund small planetary government. Representatives from across 17 star systems had gathered to observe this year's graduating class, demonstrate their abilities and compete for prestigious apprenticeships, advanced study positions, and the kind of career opportunities that came with being certified as cosmically superior to most other sentient beings. The audience included archmages, whose power could reshape reality, dimensional lords whose influence spanned multiple planes of existence, and university recruiters, whose job descriptions required them to identify the next generation of magical elite. The ceremony proceeded with all the pomp and circumstance that centuries of tradition and institutional arrogance could provide. Dominion-class students took the stage one by one, each performance more spectacular than the last. Prince Aidan of Andromeda conjured a miniature solar system complete with functioning gravity wells and orbital mechanics that made astrophysicists weep with professional envy. Lady Blaze of the Centauri Collective transformed matter and energy with such casual elegance that she received a standing ovation from beings who normally considered applause beneath their dignity. The Apex class followed with displays that would have been considered miraculous in less magically saturated environments. Reality alterations that bent space-time, energy manipulations that could power industrial civilization, elemental controls that treated the fundamental forces of nature like personal assistants. The audience appreciated these performances with the kind of polite enthusiasm typically reserved for opening acts at concerts where everyone was really waiting for the main event. Standard class students provided what the Academy generously termed competent demonstrations, magical displays that were technically proficient, but lacked the kind of cosmic significance that made observers question their understanding of universal physics. The audience maintained respectful attention, while privately composing shopping lists and reviewing their investment portfolios. Finally, as tradition demanded, the Foundation class took their turn. The audience settled into the kind of patient tolerance that sophisticated beings displayed when watching children's school plays, a mixture of benevolent condescension and barely concealed boredom. These students were expected to provide a few minutes of harmless entertainment before the ceremony concluded with awards and congratulations for the real graduates. The first few foundation class demonstrations proceeded exactly as expected. Flickering lights, minor temperature changes, small objects that might have moved slightly if you believed hard enough and squinted at precisely the right angle. The audience maintained their polite facades while some representatives began gathering their belongings and checking departure schedules. Then she took the stage. The girl who had spent a year being systematically ignored, dismissed and forgotten, walked to the center of the amphitheater with the kind of casual confidence that made observers suddenly pay attention, without quite understanding why. She didn't announce her intentions, didn't make grandiose speeches, didn't engage in the kind of theatrical preparation that typically preceded significant magical displays. She simply reached out and touched the fabric of reality like she was adjusting a cosmic thermostat. What happened next would be discussed in magical academic circles for centuries, analyzed by theoretical physicists who would question their understanding of universal constants, and remembered by everyone present as the moment when the established order of things simply stopped being relevant. She didn't cast spells. She rewrote the fundamental principles that made spells necessary. Instead of channeling energy through traditional magical frameworks, she demonstrated direct manipulation of the cosmic forces that powered magic itself. The crystalline dome began resonating with harmonics that existed in mathematical spaces rather than physical dimensions, creating visual effects that made reality appear to be reconsidering its basic operating parameters. The audience watched in stunned silence as she casually dismantled every assumption they had made about magical ability, power hierarchies, and the nature of cosmic forces. She demonstrated energy manipulation techniques that the Dominion class students couldn't comprehend, reality alterations that made their previous performances look like parlor tricks, and a fundamental understanding of magic that revealed just how primitive the Academy's entire educational approach had been. But the real revelation came when she began addressing the systematic injustices she had observed throughout the year. With surgical precision, she began dismantling the Academy's power structure one person at a time. Prince Aidan discovered that his supposedly superior magical abilities were actually dependent on amplification devices, hidden in his ceremonial accessories, devices that she deactivated with a gesture that suggested she found his deception mildly amusing rather than particularly offensive. Lady Blaze found her vaunted energy manipulation capabilities suddenly constrained to their actual natural levels, which turned out to be significantly less impressive than her previous performances had suggested. The revelation that several Dominion-class students had been using technological enhancements to artificially inflate their magical signatures sent shockwaves through the audience, and caused several university recruiters to frantically revise their scholarship offers. More importantly, she demonstrated that the foundation class students possessed far more potential than the Academy's testing methods had indicated. With techniques she had developed during her months of secret preparation, she temporarily amplified their natural abilities, allowing them to perform magical displays that rivaled anything the upper castes had produced. The revelation that magical ability was far more flexible and developable than anyone had assumed effectively demolished the theoretical foundation upon which the entire Academy was built. The ceremony concluded with her delivering what would later be remembered as either the most devastating academic critique in galactic history, or the most entertaining institutional demolition ever witnessed by representatives of 17-star systems. She explained with devastating clarity and just enough technical detail to prove she knew exactly what she was talking about, how the Academy's entire approach to magical education was not just flawed but actively harmful to student development. The rigid caste system, she demonstrated, had been preventing students from reaching their actual potential by creating artificial limitations and psychological barriers that became self-fulfilling prophecies. The competitive hierarchy had discouraged collaboration and knowledge sharing that could have advanced everyone's understanding of magical principles. The systematic bullying and institutional cruelty had created an environment where students were more focused on survival than learning. Most damaging of all, she revealed that the Academy's faculty had known about these problems for decades, but had maintained the system because it preserved their own positions of authority and protected the advantages of students from privileged backgrounds. The systematic exclusion of certain populations from advanced magical training had nothing to do with ability and everything to do with maintaining artificial scarcity and magical expertise. As the ceremony concluded and the stunned audience began to process what they had witnessed, she made one final demonstration that would be remembered long after the specific details of her magical techniques were forgotten. She transferred her accumulated knowledge and techniques to every foundation class student present, permanently elevating their abilities and providing them with the tools they would need to continue developing their potential. The Academy's perfect system had produced exactly what it was designed to prevent: a student who understood magic well enough to make their entire institutional hierarchy irrelevant. The cosmic irony was not lost on observers who appreciated that particular type of universal humor. By the following term, applications to magical academies across the galaxy had tripled, enrollment standards had been revolutionized, and educational institutions were scrambling to develop new approaches to magical training that emphasized understanding over inheritance, collaboration over competition, and actual education over systematic oppression. The quiet girl who had listened for a year had given the universe a rather loud lesson about the difference between having power and understanding it. The Academy never quite recovered from learning that difference, which was probably exactly what they deserved.